Brought to you by ConcordiaTheology.org, bringing you resources that support the vigorous life of the mind in service of the gospel of Christ.
Welcome to Tangible, Theology Learned and Lived. We're exploring the ways in which theology permeates all aspects of life. Through conversations with faculty at Concordia Seminary St. Louis, we will challenge you to deepen your theology and live out your faith in Christ. I'm your producer and host, Jessica Bordolo. I'll talk with a variety of professors on a variety of topics, something different every episode, but all pointing to the intersection of faith and daily life, because it's tangible, theology learned and lived. Today we are discussing Judah in the time of David and the archaeological data that informs it. We'll explore the significant discoveries made by archaeologist Dr. Yosef Garfinkel. Dr. Yosef Garfinkel is professor of biblical archaeology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and curator of the Museum of Yamukian Culture at Kibbutz Shahar HaGolan. Dr. Garfinkel has been a visiting scholar at Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Cambridge, and King's College in London. He has conducted numerous excavations in Israel, but most notably in Kibbutz Kaiafa and Kibbutz Shahar HaGolan. Dr. Garfinkel is the author of 34 books on ancient architecture and culture, including the book In the Footsteps of King David, Revelations from an Ancient Biblical City. Dr. Garfinkel is at Concordia Seminary today to speak at the Biblical Archaeology Lecture Series. He will deliver a lecture titled Judah in the Time of David. Dr. Garfinkel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Joining us in the conversation is Dr. David Adams. He is a professor of exegetical theology here at Concordia Seminary St. Louis. He earned his PhD at Cambridge, served as director of the Office of Government Information for the LCMS in Washington, D.C. As former director of the Concordia Center for Archaeology, he was a member of an excavation staff in Israel. Dr. Adams, welcome back to the show.
It's always great to be with you, Jessica. Thank you for allowing me to join you today.
Listeners, if you want to read along with today's episode, you can find transcripts of our discussion at concordiatheology.org. I'm going to give our listeners a bit of context to our discussion today. So, the big question, one way that there would be archaeological evidence of a historical King David would be the data that a Judean kingdom existed in the 10th century BC, when we say that David lived. But many scholars assert that there is only evidence of a Judean kingdom in the 8th or 9th century BC. Dr. Garfinkel, you say there is evidence. Tell me more.
Well, it's very hard to find David himself. It's not possible in archaeology to find one person. What we can see here is a transition from the time of the judges, where we have an agrarian and tribal community, into urban community and a kingdom. And the big question is when this sociological transition took place. If it will be 1000 BC, it's like the biblical tradition. But other scholars said, no, it was 100 years later, 200 years later. Some scholars even said it was only 300 years later. Only in the time of Hezekiah, Judah became a real kingdom. And in my excavation, in a number of sites, Lachish, Khirbet Kaiafa, Khirbet El-Rai, we have clearly fortified cities in Judah in the 10th century BC. And the earliest one is Khirbet Kaiafa, 1000 BC. So this is the time of King David. Look, the problem started with Jerusalem, because excavating in Jerusalem, the capital of the kingdom, you would expect to find in the early 10th century BC palaces and elaborate buildings and fortifications. And Jerusalem is a very complicated archaeological site. It was built and rebuilt, and then it was destroyed and redestroyed many times because Jerusalem is built on a hilly area. Later, construction erased everything and built their monument on bedrock. And in this way, we don't have a complete sequence of occupation in Jerusalem. And something similar happened with David. We have the biblical tradition about King David, but we don't have archaeological level from the time of David. So people start saying there was no David. Nobody said there was no king of Jerusalem in the late Bronze. But this is one of the problems between text and evidence on the ground. They're not always matching with each other. So far, we didn't have evidence about David and Solomon or Rehoboam or the 10th century in general from Jerusalem itself. But what's happened here is that in my excavations, in the what we call the Judean Shfela, this is a day walk from Jerusalem, 2 2 days walk from Jerusalem. We have fortified cities in the time of King David. And the character of the city is Judean. You can see it by the animal bones, by the urban planning, by the pottery, and all other aspects of the material culture. They are not Philistine, they are not Canaanite, and they are not sites from the kingdom of Israel. These are clearly Judean sites in the lowland part of the kingdom of Judah.
What do you mean by the urbanization of the kingdom? What would that look like?
Okay, if you look at the time of the judges from archaeological point of view, we have about 400 archaeological sites, but all of them are very small. This is urbanism. Instead of living in small villages, in tribal community, you have now kingdom, people sitting in fortified cities, and you have very hierarchic social order.
So if you compare life in a village at that time to life in a fortified city, now that was happening more when King David became king. What would be the difference for the people who lived in a village compared to those who lived in a city?
It's basically like today. People who lived in villages have more space. They are more engaged with cultivation of the land, growing animals. When you're moving into urban centers, you are confined inside a city wall, so you don't have much space. And people living in much more condensed area. And the economic base is not only agriculture. Some of them are potters, some of them are priests, some of them are military personnel. The variety of occupation is much bigger in an urban center.
Yeah, one of the things that anthropologists and sociologists will use to distinguish urbanization is this kind of separation of labor or specialization of labor that in most villages you don't find, right? Everybody pretty much does most things for themselves. They may do a little bit of trade, but it's small scale. Whereas once you move into an urban environment, you might have one person who makes shoes out of leather, and that's all he does. And he trades those for someone else who might import food from a particular place. So you get increased specialization, and along with that, part of that specialization is in government specialization, right? You get people whose full-time job, if you will, is to be a ruler or to supervise the community. And so the emergence of something that we would recognize as kingship is often associated with the process of urbanization.
Another thing that in urban centers, usually you have a concentration of wealth. And in Chibet Kayafa, for example, we have material objects that came from Egypt and from Cyprus and from Transjordan and also from the Philistine area. So, and while if you're looking at the small agrarian villages of the time of the judges, you don't have evidence of trade at all.
So David would have grown up in a village and then drastically changed to being king over a kingdom and built new fortified cities. That would be more of a change in David's life than I would have guessed.
I'm not even sure that David really lived in a village. It's even possible that he was like a pastoral economy because he's herding the goat and sheep in the desert. So it's not even a village. It can be like what we see Bedouin today. He's coming for a very nomadic group of people, probably.
So at the excavation site in Kibbutz Kayafa, you made some discoveries that pointed to that kind of a 10th century. So what discoveries did you make that point you to 10th century?
No, we discovered a city with houses, city wall, gate, piazza, inscription, animal bones, metal object, cultic object, very, very rich assemblage. Now the question is, what is the dating of this city with all the objects that were found inside? And this is, the dating is not done by the object. The dating was done by radiocarbon dating. We sent olive pits, organic material, for dating to Oxford University. They have the best laboratory in the world for radiocarbon dating. And we have from Kibbutz Kayafa about 30 date, not one or two, 30 date. And we can see that the city existed from about 1000 BC till about 970 BC. So it's existed only one generation. And it's a big question or a big debate who built it and who destroyed it. And probably it was built by David and the kingdom of Judah and probably destroyed by the nearby big Philistine city of Gath, We
Where
know
Goliath was from Gath, yeah.
Again, the most famous tradition of fighting between Judean and the kingdom of God is the tradition about David and Goliath. And it took place between Socho and Azekah. And here Bet Kayafa is located between Socho and Azekah. And Dr. Adam wrote a whole chapter in one of our books about our excavation report about the location and geography and the biblical tradition and put all these things together.
Dr. Adams, tell me about your chapter.
Well, it wasn't nearly as dramatic as Professor Garfinkel makes it out to be.
No, it was very dramatic because he clarified the term Efes Damim.
Yes, that's true. I did do that. One of the things that Professor Garfinkel didn't say but implied that many of our listeners wouldn't quite catch is the idea that archaeology doesn't usually make big advances on the basis of just finding one object. You know, people think of archaeology, think about finding some big thing, some really big, important thing, right?
An Egyptian mummy.
You're right, or something famous like that. But most progress in archaeology happens because of the gradual accumulation of information from many different places that can be assembled together to create a bigger picture. So it's not just finding one coin or one pot or even excavating one city, but it's building up from a vast array of information that's gathered together from different sites to help us build up a picture of how things change and develop in a certain area. And Professor Garfinkel's observation about the different cities around Jerusalem kind of highlights that.
I always like to use the metaphor, and this is a mosaic floor. You look at a mosaic floor, you see a beautiful picture. But this picture is composed of thousands and thousands of small stones. And together, they created a big, beautiful picture. Archaeology is the same. Every site adds another stone. Every day that we are excavating, we're adding more stones and more stones. And in the end, the common effort of all these people and expedition and scholars and biblical scholars and ancient Near Eastern scholars and archaeologists, together we have these beautiful pictures that you see on the mosaic floor.
So the cities that you were talking about that go along the border, what would those cities look like? Because I know you wrote a little bit about casement walls and being hollow or being not hollow. Can you tell me more about that?
Okay. There are two types of city walls in the ancient Near East. Some of them are solid wall. The wall can be 2 meters or 20 meters, but it's all solid, either built from bricks or stones. That's it, one very massive stone. And of course, this type of city walls are strong. We have another type of city wall, which we call the casement city wall. You have an outer wall. After 2 meters, you have an inner wall. And in between, you have space, open space between. It's like two city walls, two parallel city walls with space in between. Every 6 meters or so, you have a wall connecting the two city walls, perpendicular walls that connected. So in Bet Kayafa, for example, the periphery of the city is about 600 meters, and each casemate is about 6 meters long. So about 100 casemates were built around the city. Now, this is not as strong as a solid wall, but it has its own advantages. Like you can build it faster because you need less raw material. And then it's cheaper, again, because you need less raw material. And then, every square meter inside the city is very expensive. And if you have rooms also inside the city wall, you have more space in the city. But if an army is taking the city, what you can do, you can quickly fill in one casemate or two casemates where the enemy attacking, and then it will be like a solid city wall.
Many of our listeners may remember that in Jericho, there's a reference to Rahab living in the city wall. That may be the kind of reference to a casemate-type room in which she lived or partially lived. So this does show up in the Bible, perhaps. We can't be certain that's what that passage means, but it's very likely that it probably refers to something very similar to that.
Mm-hmm. And that would be a safer way to live than like Gideon, right, who lived in a village before this, and there are always groups coming through and raiding. But if you had a fortress wall, then you could be safer from these different countries trying to raid you or attack you.
This is one of the differences between tribal community and urban community. Because in urban community, you build city walls, but then you need to organize the people to come and build the city wall together. It's not done by one person. It's done by hundreds of people who came and work for days and days. Hundreds, thousands, 10,000s of working days are needed to build a city wall. And you need some authority who can force the people to come and build. Nobody likes to pay tax. And tax in antiquity can be done in two ways. One is part of the agricultural products, and the other one by donating time to the kingdom. And people who would donate time to the kingdom had to build fortification, to serve in the army, to harvest the king land, and to do other public activities. And people don't like it.
And that's the way that archaeologists can tie together an architectural development, like building a city wall, with the recognition that there is now some central authority that has enough power or enough influence to get that job done. And that's evidence for the emergence of that kind of ruler in Judah around 1000 BC.
And this fits exactly the biblical tradition. So what you said, it was not David, it was somebody else, but you don't know his name, and there are no record about him, and David is a legend. Of course, it's a ridiculous argument. You see that archaeology and the Bible, in this case, fit nice with each other.
I think many of our listeners would be interested in knowing more about how you unearthed these discoveries, the process of archaeological digs, and how would you find a pottery shard with writing on it or a fortified city wall?
Archaeologists need many qualifications. First of all, you need to have the ability to assemblage a group of people that will be your staff. This is a BA, MA, and PhD student in archaeology that can control the excavation in the field. Then you need volunteers, because the excavation is usually done with volunteers who joining sometime for 3 weeks, sometime for 6 weeks. So you need connection with universities that will send students to participate in the dig. Then the excavation is extremely expensive. You need a place to live for 100 people, 6 weeks. This costs $10,000. You need buses, transportation back and forth to the site. And then you need photography and measurement of the site, surveyor, and so on and so forth. So one season of excavation costs a lot of money. And then, after the end of the dig, all the volunteers go home very happy, and the archaeologists stuck with 50 boxes with pottery shard, 10 boxes with animal bones, and then few boxes with metal object and stone object, and sometimes seals, and sometimes an inscription, and then you need to start analyzing all this huge amount of data. And I can analyze pottery, or I can analyze some specific material culture categories, but usually we have 10 to 20 different experts. For example, the animal bones. I don't know how to analyze animal bones. So you have an expert who can say, these are sheep, these are goats, these are cattle, these are pigs, and so on. But if you have bird bones, there is a specialist who can analyze the bird bone and tell you which bird, which specific type of bird is it. And if you have seashells, you have an expert who can say, oh, this came from the Mediterranean, this came from freshwater, this came from Egypt, from the Nile. You see, there's such a degree of specialization that even all the zoological material need to be analyzed by 2, 3, or 4 different experts, depend what you have in your excavations. So today the specialization is so intense that sometimes you need 20, 30 different people just to analyze the material that was found. And that's why we are excavating, but the results of the excavation are published after 10, 20, 30 years.
And in between, you have the people who do what most people think of as archaeology, which is actually digging in the ground, right? And that's a very slow process. You're working with a trowel or sometimes even with a brush to recover objects. And it's very important when you recover an object to also preserve as much information as you can about the context in which that object is found. So if you find a piece of pottery, you want to make sure that, for example, all the pieces of a single broken pot are able to be identified and kept together so that the specialist can later reconstruct that pot or identify the date that that pot comes from. So there's a very careful recording process that goes along with the actual physical digging that happens. And it's very slow. Frankly, it's kind of boring, to be honest, except when you find something. Then people get really excited, even if they just find a piece of broken pottery. It can be a thrill for them. But for an archaeologist like Professor Garfinkel, all of that is preliminary to the kind of analytic work that it takes to build up the picture that we've been talking about.
So, Dr. Garfinkel, you analyze those pieces. Are you also at the dig? Or do you just at the end when they send you the 50 boxes?
No. I'm at the site every day. I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and we leave the site. They leave the hostel at about 20 to 5, and we're arriving to the site at 5 o'clock, just in dawn. As we climb up the side, the sun starts rising. We open the container. People take their digging equipment, and people are excavating in squares. We have square 5 by 5 meter. In every square, there is one archaeologist, a BA, MA, or PhD student, and 3 volunteers. And this group stay in the same square the entire season. We don't change people every day. It's a team. They know what's going on in the square. They know what to do, what not to do. The archaeologist explains them what to do and why they are doing what they are doing. This is very important. People need to understand what they are doing. You're not just removing earth and find pottery sherd. Okay? You need to understand what is the research question, why we are doing what we are doing. And this repeating day after day, and I'm staying there till 1 o'clock. The sun is getting hotter and hotter, blood, tears, and sweat, as you said. And we are here. I'm the first to come and the last to leave.
What has been the most thrilling discovery that you've made?
The funny thing that the most important discovery were recognized not when they were excavated, but sometime after a few months or sometime after a number of years. For example, we found a broken stone object. So we collected all the stones. It was in a plastic box because it was heavy. After the dig, 2-3 weeks after the dig, we gave it to the lady who doing conservation for us. And she started cleaning and fixing these stone pieces which look like nothing. And then it became a building model which fit the biblical description of Solomon Palace and Solomon Temple. And the description of Solomon Palace is was unclear. In Anchor Bible, a very prestigious biblical commentators said that this is probably the most corrupted text in the Hebrew Bible. Just the description of Solomon Palace. And because we have this miniature building, we can say, hey, this is this, this is this. And the text is not corrupted. People simply didn't understand the text because it was technical terms that lost their original meaning over time.
That is a pretty exciting find.
But this was recognized only after maybe 2-3 months.
Yeah, but it didn't happen. They didn't just dig that up as one whole piece. It comes about as a result of collecting and preserving and then assembling and analyzing. And then you realize, what we have in front of us helps us to understand some aspect of the text that was obscure before. Now, I don't know how many of our listeners are going to get really excited about the architecture of Solomon's palace.
What? I thought it was cool. I'm not an archaeologist, and I thought it was cool.
It is absolutely cool. But the exciting part for someone like me is the fact that we can now take an aspect of the biblical text that was obscure and we can be confident that we understand it more clearly, because the technical term for some of the archaeological structures, we can now physically see what they look like. And we thought we might say, we thought that term might have meant this. It turns out that it means that instead. And that's really exciting for someone like me who's not an archaeological specialist. I like to play in the dirt and pretend that I am, but I'm not. But reading the Bible, teaching the Bible, that's my job. And the more information that I can get to clarify what the Bible says, the better I can do my job.
after the construction of all these pieces together, and we got a miniature depiction of a building, and I saw it's an elaborate construction, I said, okay, let's see if anything like this is described in the biblical text. And I went and I read the description of David Palace, and it was not relating at all to this building. And then I continued and I read Solomon Palace and Solomon Temple, and then suddenly I have this, a moment that you have enlightenment. Suddenly I understood what is written here is what we have in the model, and what is written here we have also in this miniature building. And this really was a kind of breakthrough that happened in a second. But in order to have this unique moment in your life, you need to excavate Khirbet Kayafa for 7 years. And you need to collect all the object. And you need to give the object for restoration, And if you were not excavating this specific location, but maybe another square, maybe we will never find it.
And for 1 second, only you knew all the work paid off. You were the only one for 1 second. You got to tell everyone.
Yes, indeed.
The final question in the show is always this. Dr. Adams, what do you want our listeners to remember?
I think what I would like our listeners to remember is to recognize that it's not the sensational thing that sometimes gets popularized in the news media that's really the important thing when it comes to archaeology. I mean, we all hope to find something sensational someday, but as we were talking about earlier, it's really the gradual buildup of the picture that is what archaeology best contributes to our understanding of the ancient world in general and of the Bible in particular. And so, there's a tendency for people, and I sometimes teach Bible class or something where people will ask these questions, and it's though, that they're looking for something spectacular that they can latch onto and say, this is a really important thing. When more often it's the mundane, small things that lead to understanding and enlightenment. And, I think it's important that people realize that it's not always the glamorous thing that is the important thing.
Dr. Garfinkel, what would you like our listeners to remember?
The main problem is minimalism, but it can be relevant to any other aspect of life, that the lack of data is not data of lack, which means if you don't have something, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It only means that so far it was not found, or so far it was not discovered. And this was specifically in biblical studies and in archaeology, people like to say, this was not found, and this was not found, so they built a theory. This is not the right work to work. You need to build your theories opposite. This was found, and this was found, and this was found, so you built a theory. Maybe future discoveries will change or alter your theory. It's possible. But build it on data. Don't build it on the lack of data.
Yes, and that's an axiom that we always teach students about archaeology, that the absence of data is not data of absence.
Yeah, absence is the right word. I didn't use it.
By the way, Yossi, tell the story of the comb.
Okay, so in one of the scenes in Lachish, a comb was found, made from ivory, very small, only 3.5 centimeters, so it's like 2.5 inches. Not more than that. And when it was discovered, we didn't clean it because people were thinking maybe there are lice on it, because sometimes you find lice on ancient combs. And indeed, there is a lice on it, and they even tried to do DNA analysis to the lice, but it didn't succeed because there was not a good preservation of the DNA in this case. And then after about 6 years, Madeleine Mumchuglo, that working with us for many years, she was looking at the comb with the light from the side, and suddenly she saw letters. And this was given to our epigraphist, Dr. Daniel Weinstub, and he read here a whole sentence. Now, the letters are very early. These are the earliest letters in the alphabet. The dating is about 3,800 years ago, just the beginning of the alphabet. That for about 800 years or so, we don't have even one complete sentence. All the inscriptions that were found are always fragmentary. And this was a complete sentence. The earliest sentence ever found in alphabet. We have full page on the New York Times, and about 400 different media all over the world wrote about it. And the BBC make a program about it. And it was really a huge amount of PR for this specific comb. Now, what is written on it? I will tell you in Canaanite first. Hitash, chat, zi, lekamal, se'ar, vezakat. It's not even Hebrew, it's Canaanite. The meaning is, made this ivory erase lice from hair and beard.
And there was a prehistoric lice on the comb.
You are not the first one to laugh. Even the reporter of the New York Times was laughing when I told him the meaning of this inscription. But it's giving more power to the comb. This is the meaning of the inscription, because people suffered from lice and they didn't have modern chemicals like we have today. So it was a real problem in antiquity. And they really want the comb to do the work well. They wrote something on it to give it more strength in fighting against lice.
False advertisement.
But the lesson for us is, or part of the lesson for us, is that this object was found, it was examined, and it didn't seem to be very important. Put in a drawer, forgotten. Someone looked at it later, and because they looked at it in a different light, with the light coming from a different angle, they saw something that they had not seen previously, that is, the writing.
How long between finding the lice and her finding the letters? Like, how long was it sitting there?
Nearly 6 years.
6 years?
Unbelievable, yes. You know, even now when I hold it in my hand, I don't see the inscription. Because the ivory is very fragile material, and if you engrave deep, it will break. So it was really incised in a very, very shallow scratches. And only if you have light from the side, it's possible to see the inscription. Today we have special photographing techniques that you have light coming from different angles and so on. And then the computer put everything into one picture and you can see it nicely. But when you hold it in your hand with normal light, you will not see the inscription.
That's fantastic.
And the question is how many other inscriptions has been lost?
Here we have an important discovery related to the very early language that was the predecessor of Biblical Hebrew. And now we have a whole sentence in that language that we never had before, which helps us to understand a little bit better the development of the early Hebrew language. And we only have it because someone happened to look at this comb in a different light than it had been looked at before. And so that's the way archaeology proceeds sometimes, not with the glamorous discovery, but with, the slow accumulation of different kinds of evidence.
And a comb with lice on it.
I would like to invite the audience to come and participate in the excavation. All of them can come as volunteers. Join us for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, as you can.
That's it for today. I'd like to thank our guests. Dr. Adams, thank you for being here.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Jessica. Thank you.
Dr. Garfinkel, it was wonderful to meet you. Thank you for coming to be on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for listening. You can find more episodes of Tangible on all the major hosting apps or on our website, concordiatheology.org. We have a lot more free resources there. Check it out. If you'd like to see this show continue, you can subscribe for free, share, and leave a review. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordeleau. Join me next time when we talk about the intersection of theology and daily life, because it's tangible. Theology learned and lived.